Now at the same time, and it's harder to see because of the scale, but at the same time the supply coming onto the market, which had been around 10,000 a month, has gone down to around 5,000 a month. So as you would expect in an uncertain market, unless you have to sell, you don't. So if you can stay in the property you're in, you probably are, unless you think you're going to be so badly off by the end of it, you have to sell now. So what we've seen in the last 12 months or so is that it's very much levelled off at this just slightly above 60,000. And if you go onto the site, you'll see 75,000. This is just the 1 to 5 bed sample, so we're stripping out things like sites and so on. But you can see it's levelled off. But that still means that there's as much competition among sellers now as there was 12 months ago. And as long as there's that competition among sellers, we're going to see downward pressure on prices. That's the simple rule. It's like with the rents. Rents are falling at the moment. Why? Because there's competition among landlords to get tenants in. And it's the same idea here. So we may be seeing some kind of inflection point in the market or some kind of turning point in the market. The turning point has only gotten so far as that there's no new additions to the stock for sale. It hasn't got to the point yet where we're starting to see the number for sale significantly falling. And the slight caveat to that is if we break that figure down and look at Munster, Connacht, Ulster, Leinster and Dublin as 4 relatively equally sized markets, and they're set to, the average for 2007 there is set to 100. And what you can see happening there is that Dublin has actually seen the smallest increase in the stock for sale and has also seen a fall over the course of 2009 so far. There hasn't really been a fall in the rest of Leinster or in Connacht Ulster, and there's been a slight continual rise in the Munster figures. So again, this comes back to my point about what's driving the changes in price at the moment. It's not the long run factors like the number of properties that we built, it's the short run factors like confidence. They're the current trends at the moment. We'll take a slightly higher level and see what kind of historical data can show us. This, if you'll bear with me, I can talk you through it. This is a graph that shows from 1984 on the unemployment rate, which is actually inverted. So if the unemployment rate, which is the red one, if that goes like that, that means that there's more jobs, there's less unemployment. The other two are based on house price data. One is the real property interest rate. So you take the nominal interest rate and subtract what's happening house prices, or add on what's happening house prices. So if that goes down, it becomes really cheap to buy houses. And the last one is actually what's happening house prices, which is the dark line. And you can see that throughout the period, over the last generation, you can see not a perfect correlation, but definitely a correlation between those two factors, whether people have jobs and whether house prices are going up, and then what's actually happening house prices themselves the next year. So that's, as I said, the headline says, it's employment that got this going back in the 1990s there. But we all know now, I don't need to preach here to the converted, we know about the Section 23s, the tax breaks, the cheap interest rates, which we couldn't really do anything about because of the Eurozone. That's what fueled the boom over the last 5 years.
Why does the red line come back up to the end?
Sorry, yeah, that's a very good question. What I've done there is I've assumed, kind of like a little prediction for the future, I've assumed that unemployment will max out in 2009 and stay the same in 2010. So if we have an unemployment rate of maybe 14% or 15%, that it will stay the same in 2010. And that would suggest that when unemployment stops getting worse, that suggests something about house prices, depending on how strong you think this correlation is.
Right. Whereas if it was to go, if unemployment was to go to 30%.
Yeah, if it was to get even worse.
Falling off the cliff there and probably.
Yeah, that's going to put, it's essentially people who would be buyers who don't have the jobs to be buyers.
Yeah, they wanted to say.
Yeah, just good question, sorry. There's a couple of little bits and pieces like that in there, and I should try and make sure I cover them all. This is what I mean by oversupply. No one knows the true figure of properties that we were supposed to build over the last 10 years, but it's reasonable to assume that it might have been around, per quarter, around 10,000 a quarter. So around 40,000 a year. Now you may argue that when we opened up our doors to the new EU member states, we would have needed an additional one-off boost there of maybe 50,000 homes. So the average might be 45,000. But it's difficult to argue that we needed any more than 45,000 a year. So the brown line here shows what we should have built per quarter. This shows what we actually built per quarter. Every single quarter we built more than we needed between 2002 and 2008. And you can see how slow the property market works, because everyone knew in 2007 the way things were going. You've got that lag for how long it takes to build a property. And then this red line just simply adds them up over time. It says, okay, so what exactly is the approximate overconstruction if we take 2002 as some kind of neutral starting point? Let's say things weren't too bad at the start of 2002. So you can see there's almost 200,000 units built that we more than likely didn't need. So that's just, the bubble has now burst. I think that was one of the things I was supposed to say as well. But you all knew that anyway. There's a couple of different measures of house prices. That's what we can do because of the richness of the data. We can look at house prices on a county by county level. You can see there there's this band in the middle of the country that's been worst affected. Munster less so affected. The deeper the blue, the bigger the fall so far. What we're trying to work out is the extent of negative equity. So it's actually a bit of a mess because you need not only county level house price data, you also need Department of Environment statistics. You need what were the interest rates on the mortgages, what terms were they taken over, all that kind of stuff. So all you can do is really give an indication based on the typical interest rate, the typical mortgage length, typical number of first-time buyers, loan-to-value ratios, all that kind of thing. But here's the best guess, anyway, of the proportion of all households. So the percentage of all households in negative equity at a county level in the middle of 2009. And the worst affected areas there are Laois and Leitrim. And if we assume that over the course of the next year, so by mid-2010, we have another 20% fall in house prices, and that the pattern stays as it's been so far, bearing in mind what I said, obviously, about maybe long-term factors will kick in. But we're talking about anywhere up to 1 in 5 households in negative equity. Now, when you think about that, that's actually phenomenal because of the fact that only 35 to 40% of households have a mortgage. So the other 60% are getting away scot-free in a way, but it's the people who have a mortgage are incredibly likely to be in negative equity. In places like Laois, Cavan, Roscommon, Longford, Leitrim, there's a whole swathe of counties in the kind of almost like a T going down the country where negative equity is a problem. And I'll come back to this later just when I'm finishing up about how this ties back into the broader economy, because people often say negative equity is not a problem because ultimately you have negative equity in your car from the moment you buy it. And it's true to the extent that a house is a consumable, but to what extent is the house retradable or an investment good? That's when it comes back, and when you can't pay the mortgage as well. So some broader comments before I finish up. Talk of the global depression, certainly relevant. This is work done by some colleagues of Brian and Constantine's, both Kevin and a colleague of his in the economics history departments around the world. They've looked at global measures of stock markets over there, output, industrial output or production, GDP basically here, and trade levels here. And they've compared them with the red line, which is now, with the blue line, which is the Great Depression. So a lot of the commentary early on, about 9 months ago, was that this was bad, but this was nowhere near a global depression. And they're right in the extent that the global depression went on for 4.5, 5, 6 years and led to rates of unemployment that we're not familiar with now. But the indicators to watch out for, so stock markets, output, trade, they were tracking now. They're tracking the Great Depression every bit as badly they were every bit as bad as the Great Depression. So you can even see trade significantly more affected. Stock markets have rebounded back up, but then again, if you look at, for example, trade bounded back up 3 or 4 times before it actually bottomed out. So Stiglitz was talking today about the potential for a double-dip recession, and this is the kind of background he's coming from when he talks about that.